Wow. This has become a little bit of an annual tradition. And so my favorite part of this tradition is that in 55 minutes we'll go over to Amity Hall, is that what it's called? And have a beer or a cocktail. So I kind of like that. I don't do any other speaking events that end at a bar, so this is near and dear to my heart. Anyway, so I thought maybe what I would do is talk a little bit about maybe the state of the startup world, where I think things are right now, globally, throughout the United States, here in New York, and some of the things that are going on, and then talk about some things I think that are interesting to focus on, opportunities that are out there for people to maybe go after, and then take some questions. So I don't know how long I'll talk for. This is pretty much all off-the-cuff type remarks, so they're not prepared, and I guess I'll talk until I run out of things to say. So I think what's really interesting about startups and venture capital is that it feels like it's starting to, the startup thing that has been happening in this country for now close to 40 years is really happening all over the world now. The two cities that have grown the most quickly in terms of startups and startup financing in the past 5 years are Beijing and Shanghai. Not New York, not San Francisco, nowhere in the United States. And you see that also in other parts of the world. You see it in India. You see it in parts of Western Europe, and increasingly even parts of Eastern Europe, and also increasingly in parts of Latin America. So the venture capital and startup ecosystem is being copied and replicated around the world, and I think that's a very, very good thing. And for those of you who maybe are from other parts of the world, that presents an opportunity to potentially go back to where your native country and start a company there. And I know a number of people who are doing exactly that these days. So that's exciting. In the United States, clearly startups are happening in lots of parts of the United States. You're seeing, obviously, what's going on in New York is pretty phenomenal. I'll come back to that. But also, the Bay Area is not stopping at all. The growth that is going on, that has been going on there for 40 years, continues to go on. But you're seeing lots of startups in places like Los Angeles and Seattle and Washington, D.C. and Chicago. Chicago is particularly interesting. About 6 years ago now, I made an investment in Chicago, a company called FeedBurner that Google bought maybe 4 years ago. And at the time, I'd go to Chicago once a month for board meetings, and at the time, there was bits and pieces of a startup community there. But what's happened, Groupon, maybe is the big story there. But what's happened in Chicago is pretty phenomenal, and I think reminds me a lot of what New York looked like 3 or 4 years ago. So Chicago's growing. Boston, which was actually the city where venture capital kind of got started post-war in the 50s, is really making, I think, a pretty good comeback. And Boston's interesting because they have, in some ways, a more diverse startup ecosystem than here in New York. They have biotech and they have clean tech, and they've got obviously great universities and so lots of great science and a lot of interesting things happening in Boston. So I think startups are propagating all over the country, all over the world. Here in New York, I feel like we passed some sort of critical mass maybe a couple of years ago, and you know, a lot of things have changed now. You know, maybe the best evidence of it is the attention that our city government is paying to the startup community, and also the institutions here in the city are paying the startup community, including Columbia and NYU. Everybody seems interested in how they can help this technology community grow and develop. And I think everybody realizes that it is probably the industry that is going to grow and develop the fastest here in New York City. And so people are spending a lot of energy trying to figure out how to make it work better. And so there's a lot of initiatives underway. And the community itself, you know, does seem to be doing the things that startup communities need to do, which is recycling its wealth back into the community in the form of angel investing, in terms of hiring and developing talent and nurturing that talent, mentoring that talent, and I think that's starting to show a lot of dividends in terms of companies that are really doing well and succeeding and hiring and growing and all that kind of thing. So I think the health of the startup community throughout the world and all the way to right here in New York City has never really been better and brighter than it is right here where we find ourselves today. I want to talk a little bit about Columbia and NYU. Everybody here is a student at either Columbia or NYU, is that right?
Not all of them.
Not all of them. Few, so you've branched
clear,
out.
There are two young gentlemen here from Yale that are thinking about expanding InSITE to Yale.
Okay.
Those are the
Great.
guys in Blazers.
Welcome.
And then there are a number of students that are in postdoc programs, somehow affiliated with Columbia through the medical schools or at Sloan Kettering as well.
Got it. All right. Great. So, you know, if you would have asked me 4 or 5 years ago how well connected our large educational institutions in New York City were to the startup community, I would have said not very well. And I think the problem was that there was a lot of effort going on inside these universities to try to you know, stimulate entrepreneurial thinking and get students thinking about doing startups. But there wasn't a lot of connectivity, and I think this program was ahead of its time. This program got started 10 years ago?
99.
Yeah, so this program was way ahead of its time, I think, and it probably is a leader in many ways in making this happen. But what I think has really started to happen in a very big way is that the students and the faculty inside our large universities in the city are starting to commingle with the startup community, and that people are kind of moving in and out of these places and meeting each other, and so the level of familiarity and knowledge and relationships that are existing between the universities and the students and the faculty and the startups is very much more engaged and active than it was even as recently as 5 years ago. I'll give you some examples. Last maybe 2 or 3 weekends ago, I was up at Columbia. The computer science department was doing something called the Application Development Initiative, which was a week-long kind of hackathon. And basically the idea was that you had to start the project and finish it in a week, and then you presented it. And I was up there, and I was a judge, and there was 3 or 4 other judges, and an example of the kind of thing that's going on is that a lot of the tools that people were using to build their applications were technologies that were coming out of the startup community. For example, almost every single company was using MongoDB, which is a database product that's built by one of our portfolio companies, Tengen, right here in New York. And and so a lot of people were using Node.js, which is a sort of an extension to JavaScript. There's also a lot of the leading developers in the Node community are here in New York. So you could see a lot of the tools that are being developed here in New York were being used by these students up at Columbia, and many of them had done summer jobs in some of the top startup companies, and so there was just a level of familiarity. I walked in the room and it seemed like I knew the faces of almost everybody there. We backed a company which you mentioned, Codecademy, which the founders of were actually at that application development initiative event as students last year, and then they were back this year as judges. And that's the kind of thing that really wasn't happening so much. Same with NYU. NYU did a big entrepreneur festival earlier this year that I attended and spoke at, and it just felt like the graduates who had gone on, NYU graduates who had gone on to work in startups or do startups had come back, and they were kind of evangelizing what was possible, and the students were there, and the conversations were happening, and so I feel very good about that. And it used to be that educational institutions would think about technology transfer and how to get the research in the laboratories spun out and commercialized in the form of startups. And that goes on, and it particularly goes on in areas like clean tech and biotech and life sciences. But I think that what universities weren't focusing on enough on then and are now is just being part of the startup community in terms of just engaging with the people on a regular basis. And that's happening now. So I think that's very good. What else I can say about sort of the state of startups? I do think that a lot of the activity is today in the world of technology startups is focused around software and internet and information technology, and not enough of it is focused on things like life sciences and healthcare and new forms of energy and even the intersections between software and internet and areas like life science and healthcare. I was talking to somebody in my office literally like an hour and a half ago, and he was saying that hardcore computer science and data science is sort of a natural fit with genetic engineering and a lot of these sort of real sort of deep science in the life sciences area, and that there's a lot of innovation that could be brought to life sciences if hardcore computer science was really applied there. And I think it's probably also true in areas around energy and also urban sciences and other sort of growth sectors in terms of technology. So I think that's an area that is under invested in globally. It's underinvested in the United States, and it's certainly underinvested in here in New York. If you look at the venture capital statistics, at one time, maybe 15 years ago, if you looked at the total amount of venture capital that was invested in any given year, less than half of it went to information technology, and a meaningful percent of it, maybe as much as 30 or 40%, went to life sciences, and then there were other categories as well that were getting a lot of the venture capital. And today, I think information technology broadly, software, internet, is probably getting 60 to 70% of the investment, and that life sciences is probably down to around 20%. So there's been a big shift, and part of it is that the information technology investments have paid off better. They've less capital required, get to revenue quicker, get to exit quicker, get a better return, and areas, particularly life sciences, where you have for pretty much anything that involves human health care, there's a clinical trial period, and for good reason we're not going to put untested technology into people's bodies. But that